He said it was just a joke. The courtroom didn't laugh. The moment those words left his mouth, the air shifted, every smirk. Every ounce of arrogance vanished as Judge Simmons leaned forward. Eyes sharp, voice cold. A joke? She repeated, each syllable slicing through the silence. Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe and turn on the bell because here, justice doesn't laugh when lives are on the line. The defendant, a 28-year-old comedian named Ryan Blake, had made a career out of mocking strangers. Today, the stage was different. He leaned back in his chair, chin lifted, as if charm could cross-examine the truth for him. The prosecutor stepped closer. Mr. Blake, when you posted a video of a minor crying, did you consider the harm? Ryan shrugged, lips curled. It was just a joke, the gallery gasped. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp, final. This is a court of law, she said evenly, not a comedy club. The prosecutor slid a folder onto the evidence table. Inside screenshots, timestamps, the caption. He'd written to provoke a pile-on. Thousands of strangers laughing at a single, terrified girl. Ryan's smirk twitched. His lawyer nudged him to stay quiet, but silence didn't fit him. People need to lighten up, he muttered. The judge's pen stopped mid-line. People need dignity, she answered. Especially children. For the first time, the room felt too small for Ryan's bravado. The prosecutor continued, voice steady but relentless. After your post, the victim didn't leave her house for 6 months. She withdrew from school. Her family reported threats, some quoting your jokes, a red recording. Light blinked on the courtroom camera. Ryan, a man of endless quips, had none ready. The judge watched him the way sunrise watches night, patient, inevitable. You wanted attention, Mr. Blake, she said softly. Now you have it, with consequences. He swallowed, eyes lowering to the table. The laughter he once fed on had soured into a room full of breath held tight. Then the door opened at the back of the courtroom. Footsteps, small, careful, crossed the floor. No one spoke. Ryan didn't look up until the prosecutor said, Your Honor, the victim is present, he turned. The girl stood beside her mother, shoulders squared, hands trembling just enough to betray her courage. She wasn't here to laugh. She wasn't here to cry. She was here to be heard. And for the first time in his life, Ryan Blake understood. A joke isn't harmless when it needs someone else to bleed. The courtroom was silent when the victim took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but the strength behind it silenced every whisper in the room. I used to laugh at his jokes, she said softly. Her gaze locked on Ryan, until one of them became about, the prosecutor stepped aside, letting her speak freely. He made me believe that humiliation was entertainment, that my pain was funny. Her mother's hand tightened on hers. Ryan's throat went dry. The laughter he once shared with millions now felt like a weapon in his own hand. Judge Simmons leaned forward. You don't have to rush, she said gently. Take your time. The girl nodded, then turned to Ryan. Do you know what it feels like to be afraid of your phone? To hear your name in a joke and wish you could disappear? The question hung heavy in the air. Ryan tried to look away, but her eyes didn't let him. They weren't filled with anger. They were filled with exhaustion, the kind that comes from surviving something invisible. The prosecutor displayed another exhibit, a transcript of his podcast, where he mocked her again after the controversy broke. You called her an attention seeker, she said. Would you like to explain that? Ryan's voice cracked. I didn't mean... Didn't mean? The judge interrupted. Or didn't care. His lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. The audience felt it, the moment when his arrogance finally began to collapse. The victim took a deep breath, then added, I'm not here for revenge. I just want to live without being someone's punchline. When she stepped down, the silence that followed was deafening. The cameras, the microphones, the audience, everyone felt it. The judge looked at Ryan one last time before calling for recess. Mr. Blake, she said, maybe now you'll understand what your words are worth. He sat motionless, his reflection trembling in the polished table. For the first time, the man who made the world laugh realized that nothing about this day would ever be funny again. The next day, the courtroom filled again, the tension thicker than before. Ryan entered slower this time, no smirk, no swagger, just the weight of what had been said hanging on his shoulders. The prosecutor began without ceremony. Your Honor, the state would like to present additional evidence, a pattern of targeted harassment spanning 2 years. The projector flickered on, illuminating the wall behind her. Comment threads, video clips, old posts, each one filled with Ryan's jokes, mocking, taunting, and weaponizing humor against strangers who never asked to be part of his show. The defense objected, arguing context, artistic freedom, exaggeration. But the judge raised her hand, silencing the noise. "Mr. Blake," she said, "this is your own voice, your own words. Are you saying you don't recognize them?" He swallowed hard. Because they're not just words," she continued. "They're choices." The courtroom was still. A faint hum from the lights above was the only sound. The prosecutor approached the bench again. "We also have a witness, someone from his former production team." A man in a gray suit took the stand, clearly uncomfortable. "Ryan was always pushing lines," he said. "He'd say if people were upset." That meant the joke worked. The prosecutor asked quietly, "Did anyone ever tell him to stop?" "Everyone did," he admitted. He laughed. Ryan's chest tightened. Every detail of his arrogance replayed in his head. Each joke. Now a mirror reflecting something uglier than he wanted to see. Judge Simmons leaned back in her chair. "You built a platform," she said softly. "But you forgot that what you build can also break." She set her pen down. "Mr. Blake, do you understand now why this isn't about comedy?" His voice trembled. "Because it hurt people." "No," she corrected. "Because you made it hurt." For a long moment, Ryan couldn't meet anyone's eyes. His lawyer whispered, "Stay calm," but he couldn't hear. All he could think about were the names. The faces, the people he turned into punchlines. The laughter in his head was gone, replaced by echoes of every voice he'd silenced. And somewhere deep inside, for the first time, guilt began to sound a lot like truth. When the recess ended, Ryan remained seated, his lawyer whispering, "You don't have to testify." But he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I think I do." The courtroom waited as he stood and walked to the witness stand. Every camera lens followed him. The bailiff swore him in, and for a moment, the same man who once commanded crowds could barely find his voice. "Mr. Blake," the prosecutor began, "you may speak." He took a breath. "I used to think making people laugh gave me power," he said. "That if I was the loudest voice in the room, I was untouchable." His eyes flicked toward the gallery. Reporters, spectators, the victim, her mother. "But I wasn't making people laugh," he continued softly. "I was making them afraid." He hesitated, his throat tightening. "I thought if I called it humor, it wasn't cruelty." The prosecutor crossed her arms. "So why now? Why admit this?" Ryan looked at his reflection in the polished wood of the witness stand. "Because there's nothing left to hide behind," he said. "The jokes, the fans, the stage, none of it matters. When you realize you built it by stepping on someone else." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's expression softened slightly. "Do you believe you can change?" she asked. He paused before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I want to try. And I know that's more than I could have said before." The prosecutor studied him, then nodded once. No further questions. As he stepped down, the room felt different, lighter but not forgiving. The victim's mother whispered something to her daughter, who wiped a tear and said nothing. Ryan returned to his seat, avoiding every camera's gaze. The judge folded her hands. "Accountability," she said, "isn't about being sorry once you're caught. It's about choosing not to be the same person again." Ryan nodded faintly, eyes lowered. Outside, the gray afternoon light filtered through the high courtroom windows. Cold and unforgiving, but somehow, it felt like the first real light he'd seen in years. The final day of the trial arrived. Under a sky so gray it seemed to hang over the courthouse, like judgment itself. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, families, strangers drawn by the drama of a man who once thought cruelty was comedy. Ryan sat still, hands folded tightly on the table, no trace of defiance left. The judge entered, robe flowing, her presence commanding immediate silence. Before sentencing, she began, "I want to say something to everyone in this room." Even the cameras stopped moving. "This trial wasn't just about one man's words," she said. "It was about the world that laughs when it shouldn't. The applause we give when someone else is bleeding." Her eyes found Ryan's. "You called it a joke. But jokes end when the laughter does. Pain doesn't." The prosecutor lowered her head slightly in respect. We live in an age, the judge continued, where words reach farther than ever. And with that reach comes responsibility. Free speech is a right, but dignity, she paused, isn't optional. Ryan's throat burned. Every sentence she spoke felt like a mirror, reflecting back the damage he had caused not just to the victim, but to everyone who believed laughter excused cruelty. The judge glanced at the young girl in the audience. Your courage reminds this court that silence isn't weakness. It's waiting for truth to be heard. The girl nodded faintly, her mother squeezing her hand. Turning back to Ryan, the judge said, Mr. Blake, you've admitted your actions. You've begun to understand their weight. But understanding alone isn't justice. Accountability is. The room held its breath. This court sentences you to 2 years of community service under court supervision, she said, and a mandatory rehabilitation program, addressing online abuse and public responsibility. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Shock, confusion, even disagreement. The prosecutor looked up, surprised. No prison time, Your Honor. The judge shook her head. No, this isn't about silencing him. It's about teaching him what silence feels like. Ryan closed his eyes. The gavel struck once, echoing through the chamber. And for the first time, the man who once lived for applause didn't hear a single hand clap, only the sound of justice choosing to teach instead of destroy. The first day of community service felt colder than any jail cell could have. Ryan stood in front of a small group at a youth rehabilitation center, holding a clipboard, unsure where to start. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was there to teach responsibility to teenagers who had made the same mistake he once made, using words like weapons. The program supervisor, a calm woman in her 50s, introduced him simply. This is Mr. Blake, she said. He used to make people laugh for a living. Now he's learning how to make things right. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the group. He smiled faintly, this time not in arrogance but humility. I guess that's fair, he said, because I used to think jokes didn't hurt. Until one did. The room grew still. For the next hour, he spoke, not as a comedian, but as a cautionary tale. He told them about the trial, the victim, the moment his laughter turned into shame. Some kids listened. Others rolled their eyes, but a few stayed after to talk. So, you really got sued for a meme? One asked. No, Ryan said softly. I got sued because I forgot there was a person in it. Days turned into weeks. He swept floors, served meals, and kept helping in silence. Slowly his name began resurfacing online, but this time, not as a villain or a headline. People were posting clips of his speeches, calling them raw, honest, even brave. Still, not everyone forgave. Anonymous messages followed him wherever he went. Fake apology. You just want sympathy. You'll never change. He read them all, then deleted each one without replying. One evening, after cleaning up the center, he found an envelope taped to the bulletin board. Inside was a note written in careful handwriting. I was one of your victims. I saw your speech. You made me believe people can change. He stared at it for a long time before sitting down, head in his hands. For the first time since his trial, he didn't feel guilt. He felt purpose. And as he folded the note and placed it in his pocket, he whispered to himself, maybe that's the punchline I was supposed to find. 3 months into his community service, Ryan received an invitation that made his stomach tighten, a live TV interview. The email read, we'd like to discuss redemption, responsibility, and the line between comedy and cruelty. He hesitated for days before replying. Finally, the supervisor at the center looked at him and said, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. So he went. The studio lights were blinding, the audience distant but expectant. Across from him sat host Dana Reeves, known for her sharp interviews and unflinching tone. Ryan Blake, she began, you once mocked a victim on camera. Now you speak to at-risk youth. Do you think the public should forgive you? He took a breath, fingers interlocked. No, he said. Forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned, and sometimes you never get it. That's not why I'm doing this. Dana leaned in. So why are you? Because people listened to me when I was wrong, he answered quietly. Now I'm trying to use the same voice for something, right? The audience stayed silent. Dana tapped her notes. There are critics who say your transformation is just an act, another performance. How do you respond to that? Ryan looked at the camera directly. They're right to question it, he said. I would too. I lied for laughs for years. I can't ask anyone to believe me after 3 months. All I can do is keep showing up. The producer gave Dana the cue to move on. But she hesitated. The girl you mocked watched your speech online, she said. Would you speak to her now if she were listening? Ryan froze, then nodded. I would tell her I'm sorry. Not because the world told me to be, but because I finally understand what I took from her. His voice broke slightly, and if she doesn't forgive me, I'll still keep trying to be someone who deserves to be forgiven. The studio stayed, silent for several seconds, longer than television allowed. Then Dana nodded once. That, she said, is the first honest answer we've heard on this topic in a long time. When Ryan walked out, the crowd didn't applaud, but a few stood quietly, some even wiping tears. Outside, he looked up at the night sky and whispered, "This time the silence feels right." The interview aired that evening, spreading faster than any of his old jokes ever had. Within hours, Ryan's face was everywhere again, on news feeds, podcasts, and social media debates. But this time, the headlines read differently. Ryan Blake speaks out on redemption. The comments, however, were a battlefield. Some praised his honesty. Others tore him apart, calling him fake, manipulative, or undeserving of a second chance. For every message that said, "You've changed my mind," there were 10 that spat, "You don't get to rewrite history." Ryan read them all, then turned off his phone. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just breathed. At the same time, in a quiet home office miles away, Judge Simmons sat with a cup of tea, watching the interview replay on her laptop. She had sentenced hundreds of defendants, heard thousands of apologies. But something about this one was different. There was no performance in his voice, no clever phrasing, just exhaustion and sincerity when the host asked him what he'd say to the girl he mocked. Judge Simmons saw something she rarely witnessed in her courtroom: truth without defense. She closed the laptop and whispered to herself, "He's not there yet. But he's getting closer." The next morning, Ryan returned to the youth center. The staff clapped when he entered, but he waved them off. "Don't," he said with a small smile. "I'm not a hero. I'm just finally listening." One of the teens handed him a folded note. "We watched you on TV. If people can hate you that much and you still keep trying, maybe I can too." He read it twice, tucking it into his pocket beside the letter from his old victim. Later that day, while cleaning up after the group session, the supervisor approached him. "Someone's been following your story," she said. "A woman named Judge Simmons just called. She wants to visit." Ryan froze. "The judge?" "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "She said it's not about law, it's about life." He stood there for a moment, silent, the weight of those words settling in. He nodded slowly. "Then I guess it's time I finally thank her in person." Outside, the evening light poured through the windows, and for the first time he didn't feel trapped by his past. He felt ready to face it. 2 days later, the staff gathered near the entrance of the youth center as a dark sedan pulled into the parking lot. Ryan stood by the window, frozen in place, watching Judge Simmons step out. She looked exactly as he remembered, composed, sharp, yet somehow gentler now. He wiped his hands on his jeans and took a deep breath. When she entered, the room fell quiet. The supervisor greeted her warmly, but her eyes found Ryan almost immediately. "Mr. Blake," she said, her tone steady but not cold. "It's been a while." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It has, Your Honor." She smiled faintly. "I'm not your judge today. Just call me Eleanor." For a second, he didn't know what to do with that. The last time they met, she held his freedom in her hands. Now she was standing in the same place where he was learning to rebuild it. "Would you like to sit?" he asked. They found a quiet corner in the common room. Outside, the hum of traffic mixed with faint laughter from the group of teens. "I saw your interview," she began. "You spoke differently this time." "I meant every word," he said. "But I know words aren't enough." She nodded slowly. "They rarely are, but they can start something." He hesitated before asking, "Do you ever regret not sending me to prison?" She looked out the window for a moment. "I regret every case that ends without change." "Yours didn't," he blinked, unsure how to respond. "I didn't expect you to come," he admitted. "Most judges don't." Most defendants don't change, she replied softly. You made that worth seeing. A long silence followed, comfortable, reflective. Then she said, What you're doing here with these kids. It's justice, too. The kind that doesn't make headlines. Ryan smiled for the first time that day. Maybe it's the only kind that matters. She stood to leave, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. Keep choosing this path, she said. And don't let the world convince you redemption is a joke. He nodded, voice low. Not anymore. As she walked away, the teens watched curiously from the hallway, not knowing who she was, only sensing the quiet gravity she carried. And when Ryan looked back out the window, he realized something. The woman who once sentenced him hadn't come to remind him of his past. She'd come to witness his present. The photo leaked 2 days later. It showed Judge Eleanor Simmons standing beside Ryan Blake in the youth center, both smiling faintly, sunlight streaming through the window. No context, no caption, just enough to ignite a wildfire online. News outlets pounced instantly. Headlines screamed, Judge visits convicted bully. Is this justice or favoritism? Talk shows debated it. Commentators tore it apart. Some praised Eleanor's compassion. Others called it unprofessional, unethical, even disgraceful. Ryan watched it unfold from the break room. The TV volume low, but the noise deafening. His co-workers whispered nervously. They think she went soft on you, one said. He turned off the screen. They can think what they want, he muttered. But the truth hurt. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her reputation. That night, Eleanor sat alone at her kitchen table, scrolling through endless criticism. She had faced political storms before, but this was different. This wasn't about a ruling. It was about her humanity being used as ammunition. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to hurt you. She stared at it for a long moment before replying. It didn't. The world's reaction isn't a measure of what's right. Don't let them make you doubt what you've earned. The next morning, Ryan walked into the youth center determined. The teens were gathered around, phones in hand. They're saying you're famous again, one joked. He smiled weakly. Fame's overrated. Let's get back to work. Later that afternoon, Eleanor received an invitation to speak at a legal ethics panel. The irony wasn't lost on her. The topic, the boundaries of empathy in modern justice. She almost declined, but then she remembered Ryan's words from the interview. Forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned, she accepted. When the day came, the auditorium was packed. Cameras lined the aisles. She stepped to the podium and said, Justice isn't about punishing the fallen. It's about teaching them to stand again, and sometimes that means standing beside them. The crowd fell silent. A few seconds later, applause filled the hall. Back at the youth center, Ryan watched the clip online. For the first time, he didn't feel like a headline. He felt like part of a lesson. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. Ryan almost threw it away, assuming it was another piece of hate mail. But when he saw the handwriting, neat, familiar, hesitant, he froze. It was her, the girl he mocked years ago. His hands trembled as he unfolded the page. I watched your interview, it began. For a long time, I wished I'd never see your face again. But something you said stayed with me. That real punishment isn't prison. It's living with who you were. I believe that now. He read the lines twice, his chest tightening. You hurt me deeply. You made me feel invisible. But seeing you take responsibility reminded me that maybe people can change. I don't forgive you, not yet, but I'm not angry anymore. I hope you keep helping those kids. That's how you repay what can't be undone. Signed only with her initials. M.R. Ryan sat for a long while staring at the letter. The room around him faded. For years he had imagined this moment, begging for forgiveness, receiving silence. But now silence had been replaced with understanding. That night he couldn't sleep. He walked outside, the cold air biting at his skin. The city lights flickered in puddles along the street. He pulled the letter from his pocket again, reading it under a dim street lamp. A soft voice startled him. It's her, isn't it? He turned. Eleanor stood a few feet away, her expression knowing. How did you? Someone from the center told me, she said gently. You okay? He nodded slowly. She doesn't forgive me. But she doesn't hate me either. I didn't think that was possible. Eleanor smiled faintly. That's grace. Ryan, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but lets you live with it. He exhaled, his breath clouding in the cold. It's strange, he said. I thought redemption would feel like being free. But it feels more like being accountable. That's the difference between guilt and growth, she said. One keeps you trapped. The other keeps you honest. He folded the letter carefully, placing it back in his jacket. I think I'm finally learning the difference. She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, Then maybe you've already earned what most never do, peace. The auditorium was packed, filled with faces young and old, all waiting for Ryan Blake, the man once hated, now invited, to speak. He stepped onto the small stage, holding nothing but a folded sheet of paper. His hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Behind the rows of students and parents sat Judge Eleanor Simmons, quietly watching. Ryan glanced at her for a moment, then turned to the crowd. I used to think punishment ended when the judge said, You're free to go, he began, his voice steady but raw. But freedom doesn't come from a verdict. It comes from facing what you did and who you were. Every single day, the room was silent. Even the air seemed to pause. When I first walked into that courtroom years ago, I thought crying would make me look weak. I thought apologies were just words. But today, I understand that real strength is standing in front of people who have every reason to hate you and choosing to do better. Anyway, a few murmurs spread through the room. He took a deep breath. Someone I hurt once wrote to me recently. She said she didn't forgive me, but she didn't hate me anymore. That sentence changed everything, because forgiveness isn't about letting someone else move on. It's about letting yourself stop running. He looked down at his paper, then set it aside. I came here to teach, but really, I'm still learning. Learning that we don't get to erase our pasts, but we can rewrite what comes next. A tear slipped down his cheek, and he didn't hide it. In the front row, a young man whispered, He's real. Ryan smiled slightly, hearing it. When his talk ended, the audience didn't clap right away. They just stood, quietly, respectfully, as if afraid to break the spell. Then, one by one, hands came together until the entire room echoed with applause. Eleanor rose from her seat, watching the man she once sentenced become the kind of person justice is supposed to create. As Ryan stepped off the stage, their eyes met briefly. No words, no need. For the first time, both of them understood. This was never about guilt or grace. It was about the courage to change and the wisdom to see it in someone else.